All right, so the critics' coping has completely fallen apart. Okay, nobody trusts them anymore. Nobody's listening. Everyone agrees that the Mario Galaxy movie is great. Like, the only people who don't seem to think so are people who aren't familiar with the Mario brand, and if that's the case, that's a you problem, because this is the biggest brand in gaming. This is a cultural icon. If you go into this not knowing the basics about Mario, you know, the most basic bitch brand imaginable, then, like, that's a you problem. Okay, when you really look at, like, the criticisms people have for Galaxy, a lot of it is going to fall apart on repeat viewings and just the general public becoming more familiar with Mario. Okay, none of this is going to hold up under any scrutiny at all, and I'm very comfortable coming out and saying this is probably one of the best video game adaptations ever. And the fact that we're $2 billion movies in at this point, and the general public still won't acknowledge that, just goes to show you how deep the hatred and contempt for Nintendo and Japanese media is in the American cultural zeitgeist. But this video is not about that. Like, the thing that we're seeing now is, like, because the critics have, like, completely fallen apart, because they've lost all their credibility, because people are noticing that the movies they do like are worse than Super Mario Galaxy, we've kind of moved on to the next cope. And it's something that I called out immediately before anybody else tried it. But it was the Princess Peach thing. And this has been a thing since, like, the trailer for the original Mario movie. Like, because you saw a lot of anti-woke grifters coming out and doing this thing where they were like, oh no, why is Peach kidnapped? Why is Peach not kidnapped in this? Why is she doing things? Like, never mind that it makes perfect sense to have Peach be front and center in the plot, considering, you know, she's the female lead, you know, considering that the movie allows her to have, like, a real dynamic and relationship with Mario, you know, and considering what happened in the sequel where Rosalina gets kidnapped instead and Peach still gets to, you know, be a character that actually does things in this. Like, you can kind of understand, like, the thought process that led to this happening, okay? Like, it makes perfect sense. You know, you look at Super Mario Galaxy and you understand, like, the perspective in which they were coming from when they came up with the plot. The idea that, like, this is some subversive woke agenda is retarded. Okay, like, Rosalina spends, like, 99% of the movie captured. Okay, she gets positively wrecked in the beginning. And you're gonna, like, try and fabricate the narrative that, like, well, this is a girl boss movie because Peach does things. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And this is a problem that we're seeing with a lot of these grifters, is that they're making all these wild claims that don't make any sense. For example, you know, I've heard people say that, like, Mario doesn't do anything, that Peach outshines him at every opportunity, that Peach is the one to rescue Rosalina, and, like, it's just so far detached, diverged from what actually happens in the movie that you can't possibly take it seriously. Like, it's, like, are you serious? Like, Mario and Luigi were fighting Bowser at the end, you know? Bowser and Bowser Jr. at the end, you know? Peach saved Rosalina because Mario told her to go on ahead while he fought Bowser. Okay? Like, it makes sense. You know, it has this, like, you know, this setup and this payoff. You know, like, again, it's kind of beautiful in this sense because Peach spent the first movie helping Mario get Luigi back, and now Mario's helping Peach get Rosalina back. Again, this isn't complicated. This isn't something that should be controversial. It's not edgy. It's not pushing a woke agenda. And yet, the narrative right now among the anti-woke grifters, instead of celebrating that this anti-woke, you know, traditional movie is, like, doing gangbusters, and the critics that they say they hate are seething, instead they're bending over backwards to pretend the movie is secretly woke. Oh, by the way, but, you know, other films that are far more woke than this are great, and you should go check them out. Again, this is kind of the problem we've been seeing with people like The Critical Drinker and, you know, side-scrollers, Asmongold, is they're not really right-wing. They're more centrists that are just kind of, like, grifting off the right-wing movement, you know. They are people who would be considered left-wing under any other circumstances if the entire entertainment, if all the institutions weren't, like, compromised with communist activists, okay? They are simply right-wing by the standards of, like, everyone in power and everyone who's making decisions in America right now, okay? They're right-wing by those standards, but by, like, any reasonable standard, they would be considered left-wing or centrist at the most generous. So you look at these guys and you see Critical Drinker, like, straight up, like, do this thing where he's like, oh yeah, Princess Peach, like, she's perfect and she does nothing wrong and she gets out of every jam. And it's like, you watch the movie and that's not true, you know? Like, a lot of people have pointed this out, but like, you know, there's a scene near the end where, like, you know, Mario's the one who grabs the parasol, grabs her, and then, like, uses the bombs to, like, create an updraft to carry him and her to safety, okay? Like, he did that, not her. You know, there's that sequence when they're on the dinosaur planet, you know? Peach is frustrated because they can't get off. And Mario's the one who, like, helps calm her down. You know, this isn't the kind of thing you would see in a woke movie. And that's just the reality of it. Is when you actually look at the film as a whole and not these weird cherry-picked instances of like, oh yeah, well Peach goes off by herself, you know, specifically because Rosalina asked for her. You know, like, again, they make it sound like it's pushing an agenda that it's just not really. And that's so apparent simply by, like, you know, thinking about the movie in any reasonable capacity. And I do think this is the problem with these people, is that they're not approaching these movies as, like, critics and people who are, like, actually engaging with it and actually care about the product. Like, they're engaging it as grifters, you know. They are doing the exact same thing that SJWs were doing from the 2008 to 2014 period, where they were making all these wild claims about Resident Evil 5 being racist and about how whitewashing and how, like, Hollywood needed to be less white. You know, they're basically doing the same exact thing to push the same agenda. You know, like, you know, they want you to go to the mainstream products that they push, that they endorse, that they support, while ignoring, like, the good stuff that comes out. And this is a really good example of that. It wasn't that long ago that, like, the Critical Drinker was endorsing the Dungeon Crawler Carl guy. You know, someone who, you know, apparently was keeping his real political beliefs, like, somewhat, like, not completely obvious until just recently, and now has come out as, like, a raging leftist, you know, simply to get the TV deal, you know, simply to get more money, you know. But the Critical Drinker, you know, is someone that probably should have seen through that, you know. If you're someone in this space who makes money covering this kind of thing, and it, like, purportedly, like, revolve your entire career around covering Hollywood and, like, making films and, like, you know, critiquing them and all that, like, you should have a pretty good idea of how this typically plays out. But again, like, what we get in practice is, like, we get, like, 6 to 8 guys on a podcast, like, 8 hours a day, talking about everything Hollywood does, everything they do, every interview, every personality, every talking point they go over with a fine-tooth with a fine-tooth comb. And then, like, when it comes time to, like, actually give props to a good movie, somehow, like, it just doesn't happen. You know, sometimes, you know, like, you just see this happen every single time. And it was a problem with the first Mario movie for sure, like, with how much these guys take it out of context. I would argue it's even more blatant in this one, because at least in, like, the original, you could argue that, like, you know, maybe Peach was, like, I don't know, could have handled everything herself if, like, things didn't play out the same way. There is no arguing that in this one, like, none. And yet, like, people are still pushing the agenda anyway. It's embarrassing, and what's worse is that, like, I do think Illumination and Nintendo really did make the right call in making Peach more proactive in these movies, because, like, it makes perfect sense considering the structure and what they do. Like, we saw something similar in the comics, right? In the original Super Show, where, like, you know, Peach is actually, you know, she doesn't spend the entire time kidnapped. You know what I mean? It's like, this isn't something that should be all that complicated, and yet it just keeps coming up. It keeps becoming an issue, and it's something that we really do need to call out, is that the anti-woke grift is getting out of control, where they're calling things woke that are perfectly fine while ignoring far worse products that they give a lot of praise and hype to. Like, again, this has happened over and over again over the past 10 years, and it is high time that we start calling it out.